so when you do bids for 3D tracking, the two biggest components, the two biggest factors that you have to take into consideration are shot length, because if you're tracking a shot that's 5,000 frames long, or you're tracking a shot that's 24 frames long, they're each going to have their own individual challenges just because of shot length. And then you've got to take into consideration the difficulty factor. So we take into consideration things like occlusion, actor occlusions, camera motion, what kind of lens is on the camera in terms of anamorphic, spherical, and then, what else is being tracked? Is it an object track within the space of the 3D camera track? Is it multiple object tracks? Is it a GOH track connected to an object for rotamation? Is it deformation tracking? So all of these things get taken into consideration, and all of those things are the definition, are the, they are what makes each shot unique.
How's your experience been working on anamorphic shots in Syntheyes?
Okay, so truthfully, and I love Syntheyes. So like I said, Russ, when I worked on Minority Report, I was using software that was written by him. And then later that company got dissolved and he started his own company with just him. And that's when Syntheyes was created as a standalone application, not a plugin for 3D Studio Max, it was just by itself. And if I wasn't the first user, I was certainly one of the 3 first users.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
I have used Syntheyes since its very beginning. I've also used 3D Equalizer. I've also used Boujou. PFTrack a little tiny bit.
Okay, yeah, sure, yeah.
I'm trying to think if there are any others that I've forgotten, but I always have preferred Syntheyes because of its capabilities. There are some things that that Syntheyes can do that I don't see any of these other 3D tracking, these pieces of matchmaking software can do. Because they can
even to this day?
Yeah, to this day. I mean,
what kind of what? Yep.
It has to do with. And this is a great conversation because there is a point where I want to ask you these questions.
Sure, yeah.
So with Syntheyes, all the GOH tracking stuff, none of those features at all exist in 3D Equalizer, none. So with the GOH tracking in Syntheyes, it's reminiscent of some of the Scene Genie plugin things that I was talking about, all that inverse kinematic stuff.
Yep.
It's a bit like that. So I can actually create a rig, and then with that rig, I can watch it play and solve things and look at how it looks, and then go, no, that doesn't look right. Make some adjustments, go back, play it again, and look at it. And I'm not doing any solves. I'm not having to then go render it. The GOH tracking stuff in and of itself is incredible. Some of the multiple camera, being able to link things together is so easy in Syntheyes. Being able to link camera A and camera B and their features that they have in common. Those things are built in such a way that it's so simple. I mean, I've got a bunch of tutorials about it on my YouTube channel that you can watch.
Sure.
There's a thing in Syntheyes called Synthia, which nobody understands it. Everybody thinks it's like Siri or
Right. It sounds like one.
Exactly. You can talk to it and it'll no. What it is, you basically have this growing database of instructions, almost like a scripting language, but you can define, if you're doing C shell stuff, if you're doing like Unix shell stuff, you can define commands and that sort of thing, make
Mhm.
uh, functions. Well,
Yeah.
with Cynthia, I have been able to automate our entire version 0 process all
Right.
through commands that are like kind of plain English, like
Right.
load this thing, or like, click and wait for the user to load the sequence, and
Mhm.
then always giving them like instructions in a window, like here's what you
Sure.
do next, here's
Mhm.
what you do next. And it's
Sure.
a bit like scripting that way,
Mhm.
but there are some things like, because they're just functions that you can directly, you can speak it into Syntheyes, you can use your microphone, or you can just type it and
Right.
you can say make
Mhm.
camera one's transform, camera two's transform, and it'll go burp, and your cameras are like, oh,
Okay.
they're perfect, they're all perfectly aligned.
Mhm. Right.
Things like that endlessly, like,
Mhm. Right.
yeah. So like how much of
Mhm.
that, like beyond, like without going into
Mhm.
doing a whole
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
tutorial on Cynthia,
Mhm.
there's that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
let me back up and like talk about something that I gave as advice that I think is bad
Mhm.
advice. There was a
Right.
point where I was like, when you're putting tracking markers on things, just
Mhm.
use dots. Just please just use dots.
Right.
And
Mhm.
and when
Yeah.
I made that video, this was my like guide to tracking marker guideline or whatever
Mhm.
video, long
Mhm.
time ago.
Mhm.
I made that really for the show I was on, so that I could send it to the post people on that show, so that I could
Right.
send it to production,
Mhm.
because it did a lot of monitor burn-ins, and they
Yeah.
would
Okay.
put these goofy markers, like they would take like tape
Yeah.
and put it like big on the bezel of the
Yeah.
monitor, and
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. And
why are you doing this? And then half the time you'd only see one marker in the shot, and you'd be like,
right.
what are you
Okay. Yeah.
doing?
Yeah.
Stop. um, So I preferred dots back then because those were the types of shots that I really cared
Mhm.
about. But
Yep.
when you're looking at different shaped tracking markers,
Mhm.
you've got plus signs, and you've got little L's, and you've got
Mhm.
diamonds and
Yeah.
whatever.
Triangles now. Yeah.
Those are good to disambiguate, and you know what I'm talking about. To disambiguate, like when
Mhm.
the camera pans this way and then comes
Yep.
back.
Mhm.
What tracking marker was that? Well, if it's just a dot, you
Mhm.
can't really tell,
Yeah.
especially if there's a
Yep.
lot of motion blur and you're like, oh,
Yep.
which of
Yeah. Yeah.
those, like, I don't want to pick up the wrong marker.
Yeah.
So yes,
Mhm.
absolutely, on shots where you're shooting, where you're putting markers up on blue or green screen, use
Mhm.
your L's, use your pluses, use your diamonds. Those are really
Mhm.
helpful. Do not
Mhm.
not. And I only say
Mhm.
this because I care about the compositors.
Yeah. Of course. I mean, you've been a compositor, or
Right,
you
I've
are
been
still
a
a compositor.
compositor. I
So.
care about these people
Yeah.
downstream of me. I care about you.
Yep.
I
Yeah.
love you, compositors. I don't want you. There are two options when this happens. Don't use don't use hot pink tape marks on a
Mhm.
blue screen,
Right.
and don't use big
Mhm.
orange things on a green screen.
Mhm.
It's
Sure. Yeah.
really not necessary. It's really not. I mean, if you just used white on green, it would be better.
Right.
Um, and nine times out of 10, we don't even care what color it is, because you can track things in grayscale and it's
Mhm.
perfectly
Yep.
good.
Yep.
So, uh, the other option, like if you're the compositor,
Mhm.
you've got, I've got
Yep.
to go in and I've got to deal with all of this, like, blonde actress's hair crossing from the hot pink to the blue or the orange to the
Mhm.
green.
Mhm.
Oh my
Mhm.
gosh, what a nightmare. And then you're recreating hair
Yep.
and whatnot in the comp, or
Mhm.
you outsource it to rehabilitate the green screen.
Yeah. Sure.
And I don't like that idea either. I mean, I want to
Yep.
keep like all the
Mhm.
work being done by the same people,
Yep.
so that
Mhm.
there's continuity. Uh,
Mhm.
so yeah, please don't do that. Please don't do that.
So, can we? discuss the evolution of just like software and just tech in terms of like machines that you were using at the time and comparing to where we are at right now? Just how have you adapted to the changes, and as well as with having to learn and relearn, like I guess like updates and new tools
You
from
know, yeah,
like,
I hear you.
yeah, to stay relevant.
Yeah.
Yeah. How have you been?
So you've been jumping around in your timeline of like questions, and I'm going to
Yeah,
jump around in
yeah,
my timeline of prepared answers. Because I
yeah.
know I've watched a few episodes of the VFX Artist podcast, which is
Mhm.
brilliant. And like I
Thank you,
love
thank you.
like some of your guests are so good. And the stuff like I was like my eyes were lighting up when Hugo was talking about I don't really like Star Wars. And I was like, yeah.
Yeah,
um
yeah.
yeah, so with regard to your question about software
Hmm.
develop, adapting and new hardware,
Hmm.
one of one of the questions you always ask is what's advice you would give to a young
Yep.
person who's entering this area?
Hmm.
And one of my
Yep.
pieces of advice, and I will read it to you. Uh,
Hmm.
Here we go. Um, do-do-do-do-do. Get good at learning software.
Right.
It's a skill, like the skill of
Hmm.
learning software. Get good at learning
Yeah.
software because if I went through all of the software I have used,
Hmm.
I have
Yeah.
composited in uh, obviously Nuke, obviously
Hmm.
Shake, um, Combustion, uh,
Hmm.
Autodesk's Combustion, and then Chalice. Nobody on your VFX
Right.
podcast that I've seen so far has even mentioned Chalice.
I haven't
Yeah,
heard of
Chalice was
Chalice.
like
Mm.
they bundled it with Houdini at one point, way back, like
Right.
Houdini 1.0. And the interface
Right.
for Chalice was even the same looking interface. The icons were the same
Hmm.
as Houdini. Uh,
Right.
I remember the first, I actually beta
Hmm.
tested Houdini. Like I was working on
Okay.
Houdini point 0.9.
Right.
And all of the wave, not Wavefront, uh, who what was Houdini before it was Houdini? What was Houdini before it was Houdini? Prisms. Prisms was the predecessor to Houdini. It was Prisms. But before Houdini was Houdini, there was
Hmm.
another piece of software which was made by the same guy who,
Okay.
was just, I'm now going to do this new software, new architecture. Greg Hermanovic, I remember
Hmm.
his name.
Yeah.
Uh, Before, I think he's not even a part of Side Effects anymore.
Okay.
But all the people who used that old software called Houdini, who did this? And they would describe it as like taking a Ferrari and ripping out the steering wheel and replacing it with a
Hmm.
typewriter,
Yeah.
which is it's like it's so much better now. It's so much
Yeah.
better
Sure. Yeah.
now. But
Hmm.
get good at learning software because you're going to be learning software. Fusion, I forgot
Mm.
Fusion. I gotta still mention Fusion
Right. Of
because
course.
I
Yeah.
was using
Yeah.
Fusion way back in the Star Trek days, and
Yeah.
I'm back to using Fusion now,
Okay.
and we
Right.
use it for all our entire QC pipeline is built on
Hmm.
Blackmagic products. We do all of our
Hmm.
VFX editorial in
Yep.
Resolve, and we do
Okay.
all of our lens distortion QC through Fusion.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
get good at learning software.
Hmm.
That's all I can say.
Yeah.
It's going to change.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah. Yeah. It does. Yeah. All the time. But I'm curious how you adapted to the changes for so long, because I mean, from your videos on YouTube, you're constantly, I mean, learning and always out and about trying to create something. So it's
I
just
think that's the key.
incredible
I
how.
think you just hit it right there. Like, I
Mm.
think, for
Mm.
anybody doing this, whatever it is that you're doing,
Hmm.
whatever like thing that you
Hmm.
love to do,
Mhm.
just do
Yep.
that. You have to keep doing
Mhm.
that and keep honing your
Mhm.
craft.
Mhm.
And I mean hone your craft, like sharp
Yep.
edge, like
Yep.
get really good at what you love to do. It should be easy
Mhm.
because you love to do it.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Like,
Mm.
I love writing. And
Yeah,
so for me to learn skills of constructing
sure.
story structure,
Mhm.
that sort of thing, I enjoy learning that.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that is important. Like, keep making things.
Mhm. Yeah, sure,
Yeah.
yeah. But I'm curious about how you were educating yourself and problem solving, like on shots around the time of Minority Report, because I guess there was no YouTube at the time. Was there YouTube at the
No.
time? Yeah, yeah, of course. So I'm just curious how you were problem solving shots, and just getting shots to work regardless of the limited amount of information you had, or community
Yeah.
that possibly wasn't as abundant as it is currently.
So that word community is so
Hmm.
important. So that's the other thing about like what advice I would give
Sure.
to young people entering this.
Hmm.
None of this is about software. None of it. It's
Hmm.
all about the
Hmm.
people. It's
Okay.
all about the people. So who can you
Hmm.
call when you're in trouble?
Hmm.
Who can you reach out to and say, "Hey, I'm having a little bit of a sticky spot here, and what can I do?"
Hmm.
Uh, those relationships are what is going to save you over and over and
Hmm.
over. And not only that, but you're going to like have beautiful people in your life.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, bring more people in, and then
Hmm.
to that end, and this is advice. So that advice is advice to
Hmm.
myself when I was younger,
Hmm.
that when I was younger, I would not have taken because I was too arrogant and self-aggrandizing, whatever. So don't make that mistake either. Like, I would rather have
Yeah.
somebody on my team who was not technically
Hmm.
as good, but who was
Hmm.
fun to be around and easy to get along with, and was
Right.
like worked with everyone well. That's
Hmm.
so much more important.
Yeah, sure. Do you get challenged anymore by with shots these
Yeah,
days?
because as
Yeah.
you said earlier, every single shot is different. Every
Hmm.
shot's different. Every shot is so because it's my company, because I'm typically
Yeah.
producing all of these jobs. Uh,
Hmm.
I have to bid everything. And so when
Hmm.
you do bids for 3D tracking, the two
Yep.
biggest components, the two biggest factors that you have to take into
Hmm.
consideration are shot length, because if you're
Hmm.
tracking a shot that's 5,000 frames long, which I've done,
Yep.
or you're tracking a shot that's 24 frames long, they're each going to have
Hmm.
their own individual challenges just because of shot length. And then you've got to
Hmm.
take into consideration the difficulty factor. So we take into consideration
Hmm.
things like occlusion, actor occlusions,
Hmm.
camera motion, what kind of lens is on the camera in terms of anamorphic,
Hmm.
spherical, uh, and then what else is being tracked. Is it an object track
Hmm.
within the space of the 3D camera track? Is it multiple object tracks? Is it a GOH
Hmm.
track connected
Hmm.
to an object for rotamation?
Hmm.
Is it deformation
Yeah.
tracking? Is it
Hmm.
So all of these things get taken into
Yeah.
consideration, and
Hmm.
all of those things are the definition, are the you know they are what makes each shot unique. And so every
Hmm.
shot is going to have a different difficulty factor.
Yep.
Some shots are more challenging, some shots are less challenging,
Hmm.
and then
Yeah.
you know you see them. Yeah.
Yeah. Curious, pick your mind about the future of 3D tracking, and
I'm
yeah,
so
with
glad you asked.
yeah, with the increase like AI
Yeah.
and just advanced technology. So
So
what are
I
your
see
thoughts?
people talk about this I've seen people talk about this for decades, for a long,
Right.
long time. Like, as
Mm.
computers advance, am I going to be out of a
Mm-hmm.
job? Are they going to automate me out of a
Mm-hmm.
job?
Yep.
This is true of every
Mm-hmm.
industry. Are you
Yep.
an auto worker? Do you make cars? Oh, are they going to make
Mm.
robots that remove me from the job? All right, every
Mm-hmm.
single job,
Yep.
uh, which is the goal of the capitalists running all of this. They
Yep.
want zero cost of labor and
Yep.
100% profit to put in their offshore
Mm-hmm.
bank account. So,
Yep.
um, what I don't think so they always look at the lowest common denominator first, and they look
Mm-hmm.
at roto. They're gonna like totally automate roto, and it'll be like
Mm-hmm.
nobody will ever be able to roto again.
Mm.
3D tracking's next on the chopping block. Yeah, well, they're gonna
Mm.
come up with a camera that's got all this stuff built into it, and you want that. And it's like
Mm.
you got to if you're thinking about machine learning, you've got to
Mm-hmm.
think about art in a much bigger way because
Right.
they're going to replace the whole movie making process. They're not going to need
Yeah.
actors, they're not going to need cinematographers, they're not going to need
Mm-hmm.
anybody because
Right.
they'll be able to type a few words in and then
Of course.
it'll make that
Mm-hmm.
uh, in some two-dimensional medium.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't, this is going to happen in steps. It'll happen in stages. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not necessarily terribly concerned about like 3D tracking being
Mm-hmm.
taken over completely. What I'm
Sure.
seeing more is like performance capture happening
Right.
on an AI level, which is happening.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I think it's a bigger thing, and I also think medium changes are something that people don't talk about very much, but is happening now.
Mm-hmm.
Something I talked about again, like at least 15 years ago. I said they're gonna stop
Right.
shooting movies on cameras. Basically
Mm-hmm.
have a bunch of volumetric cameras that basically are shooting
Mm-hmm.
high frame rate lidar from multiple angles
Mm-hmm.
that all get stitched together in real time and
Mm-hmm.
then produce live performances with topology and the whole thing. And then you can choose where you want to put the camera later. And
Sure.
why
Yeah.
doesn't and so you don't really hear the
Mm-hmm.
directors of photography going, "Oh, I'm so worried about this,"
Yeah.
but it's coming.
Mm-hmm.
It's all coming.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
It was just yesterday. I was speaking to a friend of mine, and he sent me the new trailer, or there's a demo of Nuke 14, and he was like, "Oh, it's over. It's over because there's so much AI coming
Yeah.
into Nuke, and yeah. So, but I think like as you said,
You've seen it. Like I just saw like a news clip, and I forget what news
Mhm.
agency it was, but they
It was
had
written by AI.
Zelensky, the leader of Ukraine,
Right.
like on a stage
Hmm.
with multiple cameras, and they were basically creating a volumetric version of him that they could then place in
Hmm.
any location.
Right.
I was like, that's
Right.
the thing I
Yeah.
described. I've been describing that for a long time. It's
Yeah.
only going to get
Mm.
more refined. It's only going to get higher resolution. It's only going to get better.
Mm.
So it's beyond your friend showing you nuke.
Mm.
It's
Yeah.
much bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sure. Yeah.
but I will say this about Syntheyes: there's machine learning stuff in there too, where you'll if you set it up, if you give it the okay, it will send off what
Hmm.
like little 2D features you're tracking to a centralized server that then analyzes them to make the 2D tracker better.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah. All right. Okay. 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 Cool. Interesting. Okay. Seeing as we've just touched on Synthesize, and also you mentioned that you've tried 3D
Yeah.
Equalizer. I mean, personally, I haven't used Synthesize just because Okay, so I started off using
Hmm.
PFTrack when I got into the industry in 2011, and this was for the commercials industry.
Yeah,
So PFTrack was predominantly used, and then it was only when I went into film that I had to switch for 3D equalizer because it's the industry
yeah.
standard. So I guess that's partly why the reason why I use 3D equalizer. Um, yeah. Um, so I'm curious, seeing as you've used both to a degree, I'm just curious to find out your opinions on 3D equalizer and what, yeah, how you find it, what you think it does best, and yeah,
There
comparing
are
it to
things that
Syntheyes, I
I don't have
guess.
a bad thing to say about any software. Like I
Mm,
think that every
mm-hmm,
pipeline in every VFX company should be software agnostic because
mm-hmm,
everybody's going to have their own preference and what they're good at.
yeah,
And the only thing you
mm-hmm,
really care about is the result and does it plug into your pipeline and still all play well.
mm-hmm, yeah,
So
sure.
cool. That said, I don't have anything bad to say
Mm-hmm,
about 3D Equalizer. There's a lot of good
mm-hmm,
things I have to say about it. Some of the good
sure.
things, like um, the user interface, the way the user interface is designed,
Mm-hmm,
how like easy it is to move your
sure, yeah,
windows around.
yeah.
The only piece of software
Mm-hmm,
I've seen that's better at that is Blender.
mm-hmm. Okay, of course,
Yeah,
yeah,
Blender,
yes, of
you just
course.
go, I want another
Mm-hmm,
window. I want that to be a
mm-hmm,
graph editor, and I want this window, and then just drag this over, and it's
yeah,
so easy. In Syntheyes, you have to
mm-hmm,
go into the window. There's a window editor, which is fairly easy to
right,
use, but
mm-hmm,
you're going into another place, and
mm-hmm.
you don't get to see
Okay,
the result happen in front of your eyes
sure,
until you hit the OK button,
right,
and then you go, great.
all right.
Um, that I love. There's another
Mm-hmm,
thing which I've never used, but I'm really
mm-hmm,
intrigued by, which is their the basically the rotamation functionality. Have you
mm-hmm.
used it, by the way, in 3D Equalizer?
Not in 3D equalizer. I was talking about it like today and yesterday. It's one of the something that I need to like look into. I realized the more I use 3D equalizer, it's like I feel like there's like 80% of it that
Yeah,
I still haven't
it's always it'll always
used.
be like
Yeah,
that. I find things in
yeah,
Synthesize still where I'm like, what? Wow,
yeah, yeah.
that feature in 3D Equalizer I'm really intrigued by because
Right.
you basically after you get your camera solved you find out what your lens is and then you
Mm-hmm,
say this tracker here connects to this
mm-hmm,
tracker and then I'm going to make this length from that tracker
mm-hmm.
to that tracker like the length that we measured on that actor and then solve all
Mm-hmm,
that stuff and then you can look at the
mm-hmm,
results. I can do a lot of that using
mm-hmm.
GOH tracking in Syntheyes as it is. I
Yeah,
think that it could be made better. The other thing about both
yeah,
pieces of software, 3D Equalizer and Syntheyes, when it comes to rotamation, is that
yeah.
I wish I could import someone else's rig and then
Mm-hmm.
work directly on the rig. I
Sure.
think I'm asking too much because I really am. I mean, I've seen like you see how complicated rigs can be. Like
Yeah.
this one control only
Mm.
controls like this
Yep.
rotation of
Yeah.
that and then like now I'm going to drive every single one of those so now you've got to set up a rig on top of that rig
Mm-hmm.
within your 3D tracking software. Ooh, yeah,
Mm. Yep.
that's tricky. I think you might at that point be better off with something like Scene Genie way back in the old days
Right.
where
Mm.
you write in the software and you say, okay, I'm going to control this bone rotation
Mm-hmm.
on the y-axis using
Yeah.
this controller and give
Mm-hmm.
it this range limit and and then increase the
Mm-hmm.
tension as it approaches the ends of its range limit. Oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're doing 3D tracking solutions, if you're solving from the 2D photography, then you really shouldn't
Mm-hmm.
have to worry about that if your solve is good because it will
Sure.
be it'll mimic reality.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that's intriguing to me about 3D Equalizer. Um,
Mm-hmm.
then everything else becomes not everything else, but a lot of other things become
Mm-hmm.
a one-to-one comparison. I do
Mhm.
not like 2D tracking and 3D equalizer nearly as
Right.
much as the 2D tracking in Syntheyes. Supervised
As in
supervised
manual
supervised
tracking.
2D tracking, which on all
Okay.
the hardest shots, it
Yeah.
often is just all supervised 2D trackers.
Mhm.
Syntheyes, from everything I've ever looked at, has the best 2D
Mhm.
tracking system in the world without
Right.
even a close comparison. But there are
Sure.
things that are great in 3D equalizer about the 2D tracker, like the
Sure.
search area
Mhm.
internally is getting
Mhm.
blurred,
Mhm.
so the tracks have less high frequency noise.
Yeah. Sure.
So
Yeah.
the tracks always look like really smooth. I'm like, wow, that's such a great 2D track.
Mhm.
In Syntheyes, I've got to blur the entire image.
Right.
So
Okay.
that's a bit of an issue. Our whole pipeline, we denoise everything using Neat Video.
Sure.
So we denoise
Mhm.
everything in Neat Video, so that never becomes an issue.
Mhm.
So yeah, there are a lot of things that are great about
Mm.
3D Equalizer. There are
Yeah.
some things that I'm like, this could be improved to make it easier for me to use, and then there are things about
Mhm.
Syntheyes where I'm like, this definitely needs improvement, uh, and
Yeah.
then there are just pieces of software I won't even bother trying to use anymore.
Sure. Yeah.
PFTrack
Yeah.
probably being one of them. I mean, like there were some great things in PFTrack.
Yeah. It is. Yeah.
Some of it,
I mean,
yeah.
I used to love it. Yeah.
The
Just.
deformation tracking, but
Mhm.
all of that
Yeah.
I can do in Syntheyes. But boy, wow,
Okay.
they were really kind of ahead of the game there for a minute.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever felt a bit unappreciated as a Matchmove artist? Because it's been a thing
Oh
here
yeah.
in
That.
what?
But I joked around about capitalism earlier, but I can
Mm,
continue to joke around about capitalism. Here's the thing. When you're working in a
mm,
company, I think there are only two classes. I don't think there's a middle class. I don't think there's a lower class. I don't think there's an upper class.
mm,
I think there's a worker class, and I think that
yep.
there's an owner class. That's it. So if the worker
Yeah.
class, you've got people who make less money in the worker class, and you have people who make
Mm,
more money in the worker class. But the minute these
yep.
people start fighting each other, it's like the people who really have all the power love that you're
Hmm.
fighting each other.
Yeah.
So when I
Yeah.
see people like, oh yeah, roto artists, or whatever,
Hmm.
I'm like, stop fighting, stop fight, like stop
Yeah.
diminishing the
Yeah.
contribution of these people because I've done
Yeah.
your job. I can do your job,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
can do
Yeah.
everybody's job in the middle. I love 3D tracking, and I know that you
Yeah.
cannot do the best visual effects shots that are done today
Hmm.
without
Yeah.
unbelievably good 3D tracking.
Hmm.
So take 3D
Yeah.
tracking out of the mix. Go have fun,
Yeah.
guys. You're so good. But stop fighting. I'm not even going to say something like that to them. I'm going to say, hey,
Hmm.
let's stop with this
Yeah.
demeaning attitude.
Yeah.
Because even within the 2D tracking world,
Hmm.
so the way our pipeline is set up, like our junior most artists just
Hmm.
do 2D tracking. That's all they
Okay.
do. They pass the 2D
Yeah.
tracks off into the solvers, and then the
Okay.
solvers solve the shot, and then that gets passed
Right.
off to QC, and then QC evaluates,
That's
and they go, oh no, this is, and then it all gets kicked back internally. The
right.
client never sees
That's interesting.
anything.
Hmm.
Every single
Hmm.
We have a virtually zero kickback rate
Hmm.
because of
Sure. Yeah.
that. But
Hmm.
even within that structure, the 2D trackers, well, they're going to get paid less because they have a
Hmm.
less of a volume of knowledge, and they
Hmm.
can do less of the process. But the more you move up
Hmm.
to the higher, you'll get more money.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you're less of a contributor.
Sure. Of course. Yeah.
It just means that we live in this capitalist
Yeah.
society where everything has to be
Yeah.
monetized.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah. tell us a bit about your company and
Yes. The new
mm,
company name is the Matchmoving Company.
the amazing
That's
name.
what we do. That's all we do. People call all the time and they're like, "Hey, do
Yeah,
you do roto too?" And I'm like, "Nope."
right.
Just
Yeah,
the
I mean,
Matchmoving Company.
I guess with all of the things that you'd like to be implemented in the industry, who do you think is the best body to put these changes, if that makes
I
sense?
think, you know, I've been there since the very beginning when we
Mm-hmm,
went from practical models. I knew a guy named Paul Guglielmo, and he worked for a company called
mm-hmm,
Image G. Image G was a
okay,
motion control camera company, and they
mm-hmm,
would shoot all the model shots for Star Trek Voyager.
mm-hmm,
And I had this conversation with Paul. I said, I'm going to take your job. I'm not saying this in a
mm-hmm.
malicious way. I'm not saying it in a malevolent way. I'm not saying it in a
Yeah.
threatening way. It's just going to happen. And he's like, that's
Mm-hmm,
never going to happen. That was him back then. I'm sure he has a very different
right.
opinion now, but we were both
Mm-hmm.
much younger, and I was a huge jerk back then. So, but I told him I'm going to take your job, and
Mm-hmm,
all of this model work is going to end up in a computer, and there's not a lot you could do about that. And at the
mm-hmm,
same time, because there were only a few people who could do the work on these computers,
mm-hmm,
well, those companies, the people who owned those computers, that
mm-hmm.
would ran these little VFX companies, would charge the
Yeah.
studios an arm and a leg. They would charge them
Mm-hmm,
so much money. And we were paid as artists, we were paid a lot.
mm-hmm,
In some cases, and we got paid more in 1994
mm-hmm.
dollar for dollar
Of course.
than now.
Yeah.
Like, it's
Yeah.
insane how much money was made back then.
Mm-hmm,
And so any talk back then of like, hey, everybody else in the industry has a trade union,
mm-hmm.
and we should probably think about having a trade union. Well, all the artists were like, what, are you kidding? We're making so much money. We
Yeah.
have so much power. That will never happen.
Yeah.
And then the talks started to turn into like union busting talks, like, oh, they'll just blacklist us. And then all the
Mm-hmm.
while,
Yeah.
and then they'll just offshore the jobs. All the
Mm-hmm,
while, the studios were offshoring the jobs. They
mm-hmm,
were doing all the things already that all the artists were afraid of. And now I think
mm-hmm,
that ship has sailed. And now all the artists are like, there's no union protection at all.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there can be a lot of abuse, which I've seen,
Sure.
but not
Mm-hmm,
firsthand. I've never really worked in a company that was abusing the workers firsthand from a
sure.
worker standpoint. But when you ask, like, what body should be
Mm-hmm,
taking this all into
mm-hmm,
consideration, I would say the visual effects artists, every one of them,
right.
all of them,
Mm-hmm,
come together
mm-hmm,
and and you need to form a trade union. You can't do it like Starbucks
mm-hmm.
here in the US. Like every Starbucks store is unionizing, or like, oh,
Sure. Yeah.
we're gonna unionize the mill. You
Yeah.
got to actually have a trade union like the Editors Guild or the Screen Actors Guild or the Cinematographers Guild,
Mm-hmm,
where if and then you've got to become powerful enough to force the studio to become a signatory. If you want the best
mm-hmm.
talent, you have to become a signatory.
Sure.
That I think in the future, with all that we talked about, with when AI sweeps in and starts taking the
Mm-hmm,
jobs, got to
yeah.
start protecting yourself as a group. You're only
Mm-hmm,
strong together. It's all it's all
yeah.
the
Sure. Yeah.
people. It's all about the people.
Mm-hmm,
Make
yeah.
friends, organize, come together.
Yeah. Yeah. Before we end it, I'd love to get people to check out your YouTube channel. So just can you just give us the channel name
Yeah,
or
if
how
you
to
go on
find it on?
YouTube and you just do a search for Matthew Merkovich with two
Yep.
T's.
Yep. And also, for how do people get in touch with you in terms of the
Boy, that
Matchmove
sounds
company?
well for the matchmoving stuff. That's easy.
Yep.
I mean, like I said, the company's going through a transformation right now, so we're
Mm-hmm.
we have to build out the new website. The problem I have
Mm-hmm.
is that there are only 24 hours in a day, and it's
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
have to work on getting the new website made. But if you just go
Yeah.
to
Mm-hmm.
mattmerk.com, you'll be able
Mm-hmm.
there'll be contact information in there. And there's like a
Sure.
little page that says, "Hey, are you interested in having some matchmoving done?" These are just
Yeah.
the couple of things that we would need to do
Mm-hmm.
that. And then so
Mm-hmm.
go to mattmerk.com for that.
Yeah.
But I'm generally not on social media. I've,
Of course.
I've
Yeah.
eliminated so much of that from my life.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
great. It's good. Thank you so much.
Pleasure is all mine.
It's been an honor having you, and it's an honor having you. I think you're great. Your experience is immense, and it's just
No,
continuing to
you're
like
great.
grow. So.
You're great.
Hey, and welcome to the VFX Artists podcast. I hope you've been enjoying our episodes. Thank you so much for all your support. We really appreciate it. If you are watching this episode on YouTube and you are not currently subscribed to our channel, we'd love for you to hit the subscribe button. If you are listening to this episode on our audio platforms and you have the option to rate and review our episodes or our podcast, we'd love for you to leave us a rating and or a review.